Right, so the repeated targeting of water and sewage systems in Gaza was always going to lead to inevitable conclusions. Lack of clean drinking water, lack of sanitary conditions. Well, this is a situation that will kill people a lot faster than the Israeli army can, and was something I discussed a short while ago following the Lancet report suggesting the official death toll in Gaza, around 39,000 as it currently is probably somewhere in the region of a fourfold underestimation of actual figures. The Lancet is one of the foremost and oldest medical journals in the world, and one aspect of that death toll, arguably what would be the largest cause of death in the region, was always going to be the spread of disease. In unsanitary regions, the spread of dysentery and gastroenteritis due to the unsanitary conditions in Rafah particularly, where much of the Gazan population is still trapped, is rife, but also other areas such as Khan Yunis. The situation has become so severe the rise of hepatitis A in the region has made the news. 1,000 cases of that being declared each week in Gaza. But now things have become so dire that a disease the world is trying to eradicate, the some might even consider a thing of the past, is now spreading at a horrifying rate throughout Gaza, such that the Gaza Ministry of Health has declared an epidemic. Polio has returned to Gaza. Right, so polio. Many of us Gen Xers, for example, might remember getting a horrible tasting bitter droplet on a sugar cube as a child. I certainly do. These days it's part of the more standard vaccination program that was our vaccine against polio, a disease the World Health Organization declared a plan to eradicate from existence all the way back in 1988. It was just 11 years after that, incidentally, in 1999, that Gaza was able to declare itself polio-free, and has remained ever since, until now. Polio has now been found in 7 areas of the Gaza Strip, in the wastewater. And given that Israel has destroyed so much water and sanitation infrastructure throughout to Gaza, it should come as little surprise that it is spreading again, spread via ingestion of fecal matter as it is, and less commonly, but certainly the more likely explanation in Gaza though, through contaminated water. Since 1988, cases of polio worldwide have decreased by 99%, such has been the success of the WHO Global Polio Eradication Initiative. In 1988, there were 350,000 cases of polio worldwide declared that year, across 125 different countries. But by 2021, that fell to just 6 cases. Of the 3 types of polio that existed in 1988, types 1, 2 and 3, type 2 was eradicated in 1999, and type 3 officially wiped out in 2020. Type 1 polio remains, but exists in only Pakistan and Afghanistan to this day. Again, areas of conflict going back years that have hindered polio elimination. We genuinely could have eradicated it by now if not for global conflicts. Now, that is the claim made by WHO itself on their polio page on their official website. I'll come back to it in a moment though. Now, global vaccination programs have kept it from returning in other countries, but Israel has created the perfect conditions for it to manage a return in Gaza, it seems. The war on polio now essentially hinges on ending the war in Gaza, because eradication cannot continue whilst Israel insists on exacerbating the conditions it needs to thrive. Now, here's what I found really scary when I was researching all of this. Israel says it has identified which polio type is proving endemic in Gaza right now, and whilst you might assume it must be type 1, since the other 2 were eradicated, it isn't. Israel are claiming that it has evidence, and obviously I would want independent verification on anything Israel ever said, though even they have little reason to lie over something like this. But they claim that the variant spreading in Gaza is type 2, supposedly wiped out 25 years ago. Now, I thought, well, that can't be right. That's also a bit coincidental. That's the same time Gaza allegedly became free of polio. So was there a connection? I had to dig into it. So this time, though, I took a look at the page of the Polio Global Eradication Initiative, which the WHO website page actually linked to. And it turns out it's really rather confusing. But the type 2 Israel are talking about is actually type 2 polio amongst what is called circulating vaccine-derived polio viruses. Whereas it's true that so-called wild polio, type 2, was eradicated in 1999. This domesticated version, if you like, CVDPV, of which we're talking about type 2 of, are derived due to poor vaccination rates. We end up with a mutated version of the wild type, which still responds to vaccination, I hasten to add, but it requires a concerted effort and vaccination program to eradicate it. And therefore, to get on top of this, Israel's war must end before it spreads further. I really do. I thought since I got confused researching this, I'd lay it out in the manner of which I actually did get confused by it, in the hope it will clarify other people so as not to get confused and what the actual lay of the land is. They really do need to stop numbering these things. It's confusing. Find a different system. Anyway, Israel's response to this, though, offer vaccines to their own soldiers. So what? Hope by doing that you can contain it behind the walls you built all around Gaza and let the virus do its worst then? How is that targeting Hamas then? What about your hostages held there? There are 10,000 patients in Gaza so seriously ill they need to be removed for treatment elsewhere, but Israel won't allow that. In fact, since they took illegal control of the Rafah border crossing back in May, only 23 people have been allowed to leave through it. Now there's a risk of polio spreading beyond Gaza. Will Israel clamp down even further than they already are? These people need treatment elsewhere for whatever ails them in all this time. Polio will drive up demand on hospitals within Gaza. But is this not just doing what the likes of Netanyahu want, in which case? That the likes of the Lancet predicted and were ridiculed for by pro-Israeli spokespeople. To my mind, this is playing with fire. If you have an endemic disease spreading unchecked because you won't allow vaccines in, won't allow WHO to do what needs doing, won't stop the war to bring under control a disease which, although may only be a sore throat and a fever for some, can mean paralysis or death for others, and predominantly children at that. One that is so easily preventable at that. It is a childhood disease, of course. But the population of so many in Gaza, 50% of the population being under 18, means it is the perfect breeding ground for this to really take hold in a way that has not been seen in decades, that will set back the fight against polio by decades. And all as a direct result of Israel's occupation and genocide. We're talking over 1 million people here under 18. Can Israel be so sure they can contain it? Will it spread to the Israeli population? Israel didn't say they were making their soldiers take the vaccine, just that it was being offered. But it only takes one vaccine-averse soldier to carry that into Israel. We're sure they can treat these things much more readily, but that isn't really the point, is it? Also, what are the humanitarian workers in Gaza? Where could they potentially take such a virus, or indeed become sick or infected with any of the other number of diseases increasingly taking hold there too? It's not likely, and a doctor who spoke to Al Jazeera bore that sentiment out in this excerpt. Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, a paediatric intensive care physician, told Al Jazeera in an interview earlier this month that the presence of the polio virus in sewage was a ticking time bomb. Normally, if you have a case of polio, you're going to isolate them. You're going to make sure they use a bathroom that nobody else uses. Make sure they're not in close proximity to other people. But that's impossible, she said. You have everybody clustering in refugee camps at the moment without vaccines for at least the past 9 months, including children who would otherwise have been vaccinated for polio, and adults who in the setting of an outbreak should receive a booster, including healthcare workers. The World Health Organization is planning to send 1 million vaccines to Gaza in the coming weeks, but that will rely on Israel letting them in, won't it? Allowing them to be distributed. Stop bombing Gaza to allow distribution to be done, when it's more likely, like so many other goods, like so many medical supplies, they'll end up held up on the border, unable to get in because Israel simply won't allow it. I'm minded to recall all those amputations and operations we've seen imagery of for months, or read stories about where they've been conducted without anaesthetic because of the shortage of it, because Israel in its cruelty wouldn't allow it in. How is this going to be any different? The UN has a responsibility here and now to make sure that it gets in. If this spreads, if it only gets worse, the inaction on their part now will be unforgivable as well. Who operate under the remit of the UN Economic and Social Council? They can step in here. I'd argue this is a security matter too. Israel can't be trusted to allow vaccination in Gaza to happen, and obviously it has to. But more than ever, the work of UNRWA and other aid agencies is needed, yet still they come under attack. And although the UK has now restored UNRWA funding finally, it's not the end of the issues there, as this video recommendation will tell you all about, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.